So, welcome everybody to the Martin E. Siegel Theater Center here at the Credit Center CUNY. Thank you for taking time out of your life to honor what we consider a national treasure, a living legend, and as we describe, the greatest arts administrator the Americas have seen in this last century. Now here, so it's a great honor to have with us here Harvey Lichtenstein.
Thank you.
Thank you. And with Harvey, here's his son, John Lichtenstein. And the evening is Changing Brooklyn. That's how it's called. The Impact of BAM. An evening with Harvey Lichtenstein. And we would like also to thank the Credit Center CUNY's Public Programs Initiative, Cultural Capital, the Promise and Prize of New York Creative Economy. And I would like to thank everybody involved who helped us out here, Laura and Sarah and Allison, Louis Fleck, who is somewhere here, who created this wonderful slideshow and also helped us with selecting the video clips we're going to see. And I also would like to welcome next to many great faces here and familiar faces, also the great Judith Molina, who is here with us and came out to
The great
be here.
Judith Molina.
So again, thank you all for coming. I think it's really a rare opportunity to see and hear Harvey Lichtenstein, a master, a true master in his field, a visionary, someone who really changed things, changed the arts, changed the city of Manhattan through his work in Brooklyn. And we look what is happening now. It really all can be traced back directly in a line to work Harvey did. So it's a great, great honor for us to have him here with us. So thank you for coming and spending time with us.
I want to say hello to everybody. Pleased to see you.
So, Harvey, if we start, some people don't think there's a difference between the Brooklyn Academy of Music and BAM, but there is. Tell us about it.
The big difference. Well, I was a dancer when I was in college, Brooklyn College. I had a girlfriend from Sheepshead Bay, and she was had a job at night, and she was an usher at the Maxine Elliott Theater, which no longer exists, but was on Broadway at the time. And she was an usher there at night, and they had a season by Martha Graham and her company, and I met her there one night to take her home after the performance. The first time I saw Martha Graham. And then I took classes with a teacher at Brooklyn College who taught modern dance. It turned out that her husband was my dentist in Manhattan. Very interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
I also wanted to say that in November, about 8 years ago, I had a stroke. But I seem to be, and I'm still trying to recover from it, but I seem to be able to function pretty well.
Yeah, no, absolutely, yeah. So, so somehow Martha Graham was in the very beginning of your work.
Well, I took classes with Martha Graham, and I danced with some of her people.
And you also went to the legendary Black Mountain
College.
Tell us about that. How did that happen?
Well, Merce Cunningham was teaching there one summer, and I wanted to go there. And another woman was teaching there named Katie Litz, who was a wonderful dancer, and I loved her very much. So I decided to go. And my cousin, who was a painter by the name of Jack Tworkov, was there, and Franz Klein was there, the painter, And Rauschenberg was beginning his career there at Black Mountain College. And so I wanted to go there and be with Merce and be there and study there during the summer. And if you went there, I got a scholarship there, but you had to work on the farm as well as, because the farm is what fed everybody. So I worked on the farm and I studied with Merce Cunningham and Franz Klein.
Amazing. And this was before Merce Cunningham was a household name, right? It was
before he started his company.
Before he did anything, yeah.
Before he started his company. He had danced with Martha Graham a little before, but he hadn't started his own work yet. But he started it there, and Carolyn Brown and some other people were there, who then joined his company. When we talked about that, he said, Harvey, I didn't ask you to join my company because you weren't good enough. I said, I know, Merce. He said, I think you made the right choice. But I loved Merce very much. He was one of the great people in the United States. Martha Graham to Merce Cunningham. I remember Martha Graham. One time, I'll tell you a story about Martha Graham. One day, she was going to, she was appearing, her company was appearing at BAM. And that day, that morning of that evening, the New York Times had a story on the bottom of the New York Times saying Martha Graham, her company was going to be dancing at BAM, but she was not, that she was retiring as a dancer. And that night, Martha Graham was so mad at me. She thought that I told the press that. She said, I'm not retiring, Harvey. I'm just not dancing with the company this year. Well, she never danced again.
Yeah.
So make up your own mind.
Yeah.
But she was so mad at me for that, I thought she was going to pick. I was on the stage and introduced her to the audience, and I thought she was going to pick me up and throw me off the stage. She was strong enough to do that. She was not a big woman, but she was very strong. Mm-hmm. And then she walked off the stage and walked on the aisle up to all the way around, and she went around the stage to her seat. And the audience all stood up and clapping the whole time she walked around until she sat down, when the curtain went up and the company started dancing. Mm-hmm. She was quite a woman. She was extraordinary.
Yeah. And she really, as with so many things, she was in the center. So you danced professionally as a while?
I danced professionally.
And then you went into, as we say today, arts administration, which now has,
what happened was, I was working up at Brandeis University. I got married for my first wife. I was married twice. I got married to my first wife, and I got a job working at Brandeis University up in Waltham, Massachusetts, as a fundraiser. And I went up there, and I worked there for several years at Brandeis. And one day I saw in the paper, in the Boston paper, a little notice that said that the Ford Foundation was starting a new program. They were worried because there weren't enough people in the arts who were taking up administration and who could be managers for opera groups, for theater groups, for dance groups. So they were starting a program for people who had been performers, but who then had gotten a job in outside of the arts, but who might be people who could be good to go back into the arts and be managers, learn to be managers. So they said they wanted to start a program to find these people. So I wrote away to them. I called the Ford Foundation, and I said, I'm ready. And they said, you can't apply. You have to have someone nominate you. I said, who up in Boston could do it? And there was a woman named E. Virginia Williams, who was head of the Boston Ballet. They said she could do it. So I didn't know her. I gave her a call. I said, Miss Williams, I want to see you about this fourth thing. So I went to see, I spent an hour with her, and she said she'd be delighted to recommend that I do this thing. So she did, and the Ford Foundation sent up somebody to interview me to see if I was right for it. And they gave me the scholarship, and they said, where do you want to dance? Where do you want to work? I said, I want to work with a dance company. They said, which one? I said, the New York City Ballet. They said, okay, we'll see. So then they called me back. They said, look, I'm sorry, but the New York City Ballet said they can't take you on because they just moved in from the city center to the Lincoln Center, and they were too busy adjusting to that situation, and they couldn't have anybody to train. They didn't have the time to do it. So I said, then the Ford Foundation said, well, look, we already called the San Francisco Ballet, and they'd be delighted to have you. I said, nope, I want to go to New York. I want to go back to New York. I said, could you set up a meeting for me to meet with whoever I need to meet with at the New York City Ballet to talk to them, to see if I can talk them into taking me on. And they made an appointment with me with Betty Cage, who was the general manager of the New York City Ballet. So I came to New York and met with Betty, and I said, look, I won't bother you. She said, you know, it's very difficult. I have a lot to do, but I don't think I can give you a lot of time. It's okay. I won't bother you too much. Let me look at the files and let me mix with the company. I'll be fine. I'll find things to do, and I won't get in your way. And they said, okay. And
you then worked the New York City Opera.
I then went to New York and I spoke to Betty Cage, and she said, okay. And my first son was born, and I had to pick him up and go to New York. They said the stipend they gave me to do this work with the New York City Ballet was $9,000, and here I was with a wife and a child. I said, fine, whatever you give me will be fine. I'll make it work. As long as I can work with the New York City Ballet. And so that's how I started. And I loved so much being with the ballet. I used to go every night. And in the back of the orchestra, there was a little place to sit behind a glass window. You could see the stage, and the music was piped in. And young dancers used to go there to watch and see the more experienced dancers dance when they wanted to learn. So I used to go there every night. I used to come home, and you'd scream about what a great man Balanchine was, and Lincoln Kirstein, whom I got to know very well. And then after my first year, I told in New York City, the Ford Foundation said, well, what are we going to do with you, Harvey? I said, I'll have to get a job. And they said, that's a good idea. But the problem was that the attendance at the New York City Ballet was going down. After the first season, everybody wanted to see the new theater, the New York State Theater. Then so it was filled. But the second year, the attendance dropped a lot. So the head of the Ford Foundation talked to Lincoln Kirstein and said, what you need to do is you need to start a subscription season. And that'll work. And then Harvey can do that. I said, but I don't know anything about subscription. And the Ford Foundation said, well, we have a guy who does it for the Chicago Opera. And we put him on our payroll, and we send him around to theater companies and opera companies and so on. So he will help you set it up, and he'll be your guide. And I said, okay, so I had a job. He offered me a slight increase in salary, not much, but a little bit. But I had an office at the old city center. There were no offices available at the State Theater. And I started the subscription with this guy who worked for the Chicago Opera. And it was extraordinary. The subscriptions came in by the hundreds. I used to work till 2 o'clock in the morning trying to fill them and do the work. It was amazing. And I had to work at the old city center because there was no office for me left at the State Theater. And I used to work till 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning doing that. We had an incredible, there were 2 people I remember who bought subscriptions. One bought subscription to every night in the first ring. He was an artist who was nuts about. He used to come in his sneakers. I used to go up to the first ring and see him every night in his sneakers coming to see Balanchine in the first ring. And then there was a woman who bought every single night subscription in the 4th ring all the way up. That's all she could afford. Mm-hmm. It turned out she was a stenographer for court service. But she loved ballet, and she used to come every night. And then she turned into a critic for a local newspaper. She became a dance critic.
Mm-hmm. And how did it? So, in around '67, how did you come to BAM?
Well,
how did that happen?
A friend of mine who lived in the Brooklyn Heights came up to me and said, "Harvey, the guy who's the director at the Brooklyn Academy of Music is leaving. You think you might be interested in the job?" I said, "I might." He said, "Well, there's a guy named Seth Faison who's on the board, who's heading up the search committee, and you have to call him up and make an appointment to see him and see what happens." Well, that was lucky, because Seth was a great fan of dance. He loved dance. So the fact that I had been a dancer, and there were 3 people who were finally up for the job. Both had more experience than me. But I got the job. They gave it to me. Seth loved my dance background, and he thought that was a good thing for BAM.
Wonderful. Tell us a bit, how did BAM look like? I heard it was painted gray with leftover ship paint, military.
The opera house was painted gray-white. Leftover paint from the Navy shipyard, the Navy Yard, down right on the East River in Brooklyn. All the white paint for the ships were there. They took that and they repainted the whole opera house white at the end of the war.
How did it look like inside? Who else was in there? What was happening?
Well, I had no idea, but I took the job. They offered me the job, and I took it. And I remember calling up a guy named Blau. He was a chairman of the board of the opera and the New York City Ballet. And I told him that I was going to be leaving. He's going to have to find a new subscription manager for the ballet and for the opera. But I was offered a job to run the Brooklyn Academy of Music. And he said, "Harvey, let me tell you something." He said, "Those of us who have been involved with the arts in New York City know about the Brooklyn Academy of Music, and nothing can be done there. You may be ending your career by going there." I said, "I understand what you're saying. I know what you mean, and other people have told me the same. But nobody else is offering me a job to run a theater, particularly in New York City. So I've got to take it, and I'm going to take it. He said, do you know what you're going to do there? I said, I have no idea, but I'm going to take the job. But in a way, I knew what I was going to do. I didn't really know it, but inside, I knew, because I remember sitting still in the city center in my office with the New York City Opera and the New York City Ballet, and seeing an article in the New York Times which said that Sarah Caldwell, who was then making a big name for herself as a director of the Opera Company of Boston, and Beverly Stills would go up there and sing with her because the work was so interesting, and she was such an interesting impresario and director and conductor. So I called, when I was sitting still at City Center, I called up and said, I called up Sarah Caldwell in Boston. I said, I hear you're starting a new touring opera company. And she said, yes. And I said, do you have a place to perform in New York? And she said, no, I don't. I said, would you like to perform in New York? I said, how about the Brooklyn Academy of Music? I said, I'll be over there in another month, and I'll give you a call, and let's see if we can make a deal. So when I moved in March, that was in December, when I moved in March to the Brooklyn Academy of Music, I called up, and we made a deal for the Sarah Caldwell's company to come to New York and do 3 operas in 3 days. On Friday night, she was going to do Lulu, which I knew was a good, interesting thing to do because the Met wasn't doing it. And then the second opera was Falstaff, which we scheduled the Lulu for a Friday night and the Falstaff for a Saturday matinee. And then Tosca, the one opera everybody knew, but her version of her approach to Tosca on Saturday evening. The Lulu was a great success, and people like Leonard Bernstein were there and came. And so we began to get people to see that there was stuff going on at the Brooklyn Academy of Music that was interesting, and that wasn't being done. The Met wasn't going to do Lulu at that time. And the Falstaff wasn't also an opera that the Met was doing at that time. And the Falstaff was on Saturday afternoon. And I, being very young and very inexperienced, I didn't realize that there was a major set change on Saturday afternoon from Falstaff to Tosca. And so we didn't start Tosca till about, supposed to start at 7 o'clock or 7:30. We didn't get it going until about 9 o'clock. The poor audience sat there till 9 o'clock. When the curtain finally came down at about 1 o'clock, there was a huge cheer. It was a good performance. And there was a very interesting Australian singer who was doing the Tosca. And the cheers were not only because of the performance, but because it was finally over.
Well, we got an email from a friend in London who said events or presentation at BAM never were just a corporate presentation out of the middle. He said they were always a real event. And they were dangerous, and you never knew what would happen or what could happen to them. And
I knew I had a built-in audience, and I went, excuse me, I went to visit Saul Urach. And I said, can I have this one and this one and this one? He said, no. No, you can have these second-grade people. He said, because my people play at Carnegie Hall, he said. We don't play at the Brooklyn Academy of Music, like Horowitz and so on. I said, okay, goodbye. And I knew where I was headed. And things happened very quickly.
What was your vision? Who did you want it to bring to Brooklyn?
I had no idea. I began to develop those ideas. I got a letter from a lawyer who said he was representing the Living Theater, Julian and Judith Malina, Julian Beck and Judith Malina, who were in Europe and performing and living in Europe. And they wanted to come back to New York and they wanted to perform and come in the United States. He said, would you be interested? I said, you're damn right I'd be interested. And he said, well, look, they're going to perform up at Yale first. I spoke to them, and they'll come. The first place in the United States would be at Yale University Theater. And then they'll come to BAM after that, okay? I said, that's fine. They're going to do 4 plays, new plays that had not been seen in this country, beginning with Frankenstein, which was an extraordinary production they did in the Opera House. The other 3 productions they did in the smaller theater. Yeah, the Frankenstein was extraordinary, and the set was amazing. A big, long set made up of steel bars with people climbing from one level to another and performing. And that idea had been used a lot by people like Bob Wilson and Robert Lepage. It was an idea that people saw in the Living Theater. The Living Theater sold every seat. It was packed every night. We had to turn people away. And Julian Beck and Judith Malina were just fantastic. They sold every seat.
That is amazing. Truly, if one looks at the list of artists you presented, is the entire history or the great history of the 20th century or post.
Well, then
theater.
Another thing happened. I met a woman named Ninan.
Carl-Weiss?
Carl-Weiss.
Carl-Weiss? Mm-hmm.
Yes, she was asking Carl-Weiss, who was an actor. She was his widow. And she was an agent, a theater agent, and a book agent. And she began to talk to me about people I should talk to. She said, you know, there's a guy in Poland who has a company and it's becoming a huge hit in Europe, and you should check into it, Harvey. I said, okay, Ninan. And this was Grotowski.
Maybe we'll show a bit of the clip. We have very short clips. They're always like 50, 60 seconds. We presented this, but so
Grotowski, I wrote away to him and said, yes, he would be interested in coming to New York. I said, well, come on over, let's talk about it. So he came over from Poland, and we talked about it, and he looked at the Brooklyn Academy of Music. He said, look, I don't want to perform in any big theater. I want to perform in a church. And I said, well, Brooklyn is called the city of churches. Let me see what I could find for you. So I looked around Brooklyn, and there was a church right up the block, which I thought was right up the block on St. Felix Street. And Grotowski came, he took a look at it. He was very particular. And then someone told me that there was a church. If you couldn't find one in Brooklyn, there was a church on West 4th Street in Manhattan, right near the park. What do you call it?
Washington Square?
What?
Washington Square Park?
Washington Square Park, right half a block between Washington Square Park and 6th Avenue on West 4th Street. There was a church, and it was possible maybe to get that church for Grotowski.
Can we show the clip? So he actually, it's Harvey who brought Grotowski over too.
So Grotowski came over and he looked at the church and he said, that'll do. Well, the thing that was interesting about it was the time. The war in Asia that we were in.
Korea?
What?
Korean?
Not Korean. Before that.
Vietnam?
What? After that, yeah.
This is something which is from...
Pretty great. church, the people in the church had abandoned the upstairs. I don't know. Upstairs.
As an old man, Jacob goes to his homeland.
Vietnam. What?
Vietnam.
Vietnam War. But the church people had left the church and went down to the cellar. They had an office, and they were advising people who didn't want to be drafted about how to deal with that. But the church upstairs was available for Grotowski. So a couple of my stagehands are here. One of the things that made band so great was we had wonderful stagehands. Pina Bausch used to come every year and leave them a case of wine or something because they took care of her so well and they managed her production so well. And they were fantastic, and I loved working with them. And now they were a big part of what made band attractive to companies, because the companies loved the way the stagehand took care of them on stage.
Yeah, you were known to have an extraordinary team and dedicated collaborators. But Grotowski came with a friend, right, from Britain to...
Yeah. Grotowski had a friend who wanted to make sure that he was treated right. That friend was named Peter Brook, who was going around Europe and trying to get people to take him in Europe. And he became a very close friend of Grotowski. So he came over and came in New York, and I met him. But he wanted to make sure that Grotowski was treated right. So he was here that whole time. That's how I got to know Peter Brook. And Peter Brook, when he went back after, he said, Harvey, I'm going to be doing a production at Stratford this summer of A Midsummer Night's Dream. He said, I think you should come and see it. I think maybe you'll like it. I said, okay, Peter. So right away, I knew what was going to work for me. Sarah Caldwell was going to work for me and get an audience. And the Living Theater was going to get an audience. And these were productions and people that wanted to work in BAM, that were interested in being off the main, they want to be off the main, the main stages.
Maybe I think we also have a clip of Peter Brook doing an empty space workshop at BAM. So you will see.
That was later.
That was later. But we could show it now. But we also have the Midsummer Night Dream. But maybe we could show both of them. First, the Midsummer. It's a very short one, but so you get an idea. It's a legendary production, and many people say it's the most sublime work of theater they've seen.
I think I would say that.
Yeah.
And eke most lovely
when I went to see it in England,
as true as horse,
for
that yet would never tire. I'll meet thee, Permus, at Ninny's tomb.
I was seated on the aisle, and at the end of the play, Puck's last lines to the audience are, give me your hands if we be friends, and Puck will make amends. And then he walked off the stage, and the whole company followed him off the stage, walked up the 2 aisles, shaking hands with people. And I jumped up and grabbed Puck, and I gave him a hug. He went, who the hell is this madman there?
Well, he so knew. But even so, it's later. But let's see. This is in the space upstairs. I think this is a Brook workshop.
That's when he did something of the birds.
Of the birds. You can see the windows of BAM.
The Brook space.
Smoking Peter Brook.
But anyway, even though Grotowski wasn't there, it wasn't. But people began to get the idea. I identified it with there, even though it was done not at there. And they identified it with them and with the Living Theater. And then at that time, also, a company of performers called the Chelsea Theater, performing in a space in Chelsea, which they wanted to get a new space, so they came to see me.
You should have many things to tie together.
And Oliver Ray was chairman of their board, and he was a Broadway producer, and he had been involved in Minneapolis with the theater there, the Guthrie Theater. And so Oliver Ray brought in the Chelsea Theater, and we had an upstairs space, which was a lecture hall, which we made into a 100 or 200 seat theater, the Chelsea Theater. And one of the first plays they did was a play by Leroy Jones called Slave Ship. It was extraordinary. I remember sitting in there and watching it and feeling the tension. It was a mixed black and white audience that came to see it night after night. And the tension in that audience with Slave Ship was extraordinary. I thought the place would explode. But it was an extraordinary production. But again, what Chelsea did and what we were able to get, later someone told me to go and see a company in Brussels by the name the Beja Dance Company. Maurice Beja. I went to see them, and it was a crazy stuff. He did dances to Wagner, if you can imagine a part of to some of the Wagner stuff. It was really interesting, and I liked. And he also did an extraordinary production of Stravinsky's L'Histoire des Soldats. No, not L'Histoire des Soldats. What?
Rite of Spring?
Yeah. The what?
Rite of Spring?
The Rite of Spring. And this was mostly performed by women, but he had all men doing it, and it was terrific. And that drew an audience too, even though the critics would have sold out, and people came and they liked it.
But even so, from some performances, you draw big audiences. I also know that you presented Merce Cunningham before he was Cunningham, and it was empty. Not a lot of people came.
Yeah. And then they would walk out, and they would boo as they walked out. And I would sit there and hear it. And I would still feeling terrible. But I felt great, because John Cage came up to me. He said, Harvey, you know, we performed here before. They always put us in a small theater. And we always looked at the Opera House as being where we should be. So I want to thank you for putting us in the Opera House.
How did you know that art is great art? When did you know, I think this is something I want to present?
I went to see it, and you know, I tell you, someone at Pratt told me, at Pratt Institute, told me there was a guy named Bob Wilson who had studied at Pratt, architecture, and he had done a thing on 2nd Avenue in one of those theaters down Lower 2nd Avenue. It had been used by the Yiddish Theater and other people. And he had done a piece called, I forget it what it's...
Life and Times of Sigmund Freud?
No, that was a piece which I couldn't see because it was closed by the time I heard about it. But Bob Wilson came to see me, and I came to see him. I told him it was called The King of Spain. But then he said he wanted to do it in the BAM Opera House. So we worked out a deal for him to do it but it changed from The King of Spain to The Life and Times of Sigmund Freud.
But what? Stalin afterwards, yeah. But it's one of the legendary also events in the 20th century that...
then we brought it, that was in December.
December, 2 days before Christmas, yes.
In the spring.
Yeah. Maybe we can show the little clip. It is, I think Bob made an arrangement for a very low rent. He could rent it for 2 days, and Harvey showed it, and 30 people came.
And the Sigmund Freud was played one night by a friend of Bob Wilson's, by the name of Jerome Robbins. Jerome Robbins had seen Bob's work and was very much taken by it, and he wanted to play in it. And so he played Freud at that second performance.
Yeah. So here we see...
Nobody knew it. We didn't even announce it. He just did it.
Incredible. Yeah, this is one of the great events of the history of the avant-garde.
He was very influenced by Bob Wilson. He did a place called Watermill.
Yeah.
For the New York City Ballet, which is very much influenced by Bob Wilson. But then it was really interesting, and what was happening was, my eyes were opening up. I didn't quite understand what Bob was doing, but I loved it. There was something in me. He had one section of Freud where he had about 40 or 50 mammies dancing, and Merce Cunningham told me that was beautiful. He loved it. They were dressed in white mammy costumes, and they did this thing which Bob choreographed for them. And Lucinda Childs danced with Bob Wilson at that time. And it was, so I didn't quite understand it myself, but I just said, Harvey, just listen to it and look at it and just take it easy.
Yeah, which is, just to point out, quite a different approach in arts administration today, or people who go, right from high school or whatever, in arts administration or business school. In between, Harvey, as a dancer, said what he just said. He said, listen to it and be open to it, and
I began to like it. And then he did this crazy piece called The Life and Times of Joseph Stalin. It was a 9-hour piece. It started at 7 or 8 o'clock at night and went through the night. And I had, in the workspace, I had food for people who wanted to have a snack during the night. I remember sitting there, people told me they remember me sitting in the first balcony with a bottle of beer, chug-a-lugging. I was mad in hell at Bob because it was supposed to be an 8-hour piece, and he went to 9 hours, which meant an extra hour for the stage hands, which I couldn't afford. But anyway, the sun came up and he stopped.
An incredible time, and we all wish to have been there. And but dance was a center. You had also Meredith Monk, and you had Twyla Tharp early. How did you meet?
Lucinda Childs.
Lucinda Childs.
Twyla Tharp was interesting. I had a guy named Paul Leperc. He was a Frenchman. But he had a business here. He's connected to the Schlumberger family in Paris. And he had Leperc and Company here. It was it was a trading company. And he said, Harvey, and he loved dance. And he said, Harvey, there's a woman who's going to be performing at the Metropolitan Museum. Her name is Twyla Tharp, with a small company. I said, at the Metropolitan Museum? He said, yeah, come with me. I said, okay, Paul. So we went in, and put Twyla Tharp and 4 other girls. It was 5 girls in the company. They went up and down the stairs. They went to other rooms. They went all around. It was crazy. I didn't know what was going on. But I said, Twyla, how would you like to dance at BAM? She said, so I took her over there. She said, this is too big for me. So we made a deal where she would perform on the stage, and we put seats all around the stage, on the stage, to watch it. So it's 5 women and about 100 people around them watching the dance.
I don't know if we have a clip. It was probably not that performance, but if we have a...
But then I began to understand
The Wilson piece.
what would work, what I needed to do with BAM, and I knew who I needed to get. And I knew the people who didn't make it. There was a choreographer by the name of John Newmeyer, who came from Milwaukee, I think, or from the Midwest. But he was the head of the Hamburg Ballet Company. He was a good guy, and I got to know him well. I used to go to Hamburg and see the company, and I used to love his ballets. He used to do full-length ballets. This was the story of Camille. He did all kinds, and I brought him to New York. And the critics hated him, and I loved him. I said, "It's okay, John." He said, "Well, why don't you get your family from the Midwest to come and see it?" But he was not a great choreographer, but he was a good choreographer. And it was an interesting company. But it didn't make it. It wasn't like when I went to Stuttgart once, and my friend Dennis Russell Davies was conducting the Stuttgart Orchestra. And Dennis's wife told me, "There's a guy you got to go see in Frankfurt. He runs the Frankfurt Ballet. His name is Billy Forsyth." He said, "There's a train going up there in about 2 hours. My son is going up," she said, "to see it. Why don't you do that? Go up and see it." I went up and I saw Billy Forsyth in Frankfurt. And I thought, what in hell is this? So then I came back, and I saw what in hell it was. Except one thing, which I still talk to him about. He did a musical. He wrote the music, and he wrote the script, and it was about a producer producing a show on Broadway. With his ballet company, he did it. They sang, and he wrote the music in it. And he wrote a lot of the music. We got someone to write the music. And the music was terrific. And I said, "Billy, I don't like it." He said, "Oh, it's okay." Then I went to Paris one day, and he had a season in Paris at a theater, and he did the musical, and I saw it again. And I said, "Billy, I think it's terrific. Why don't we do it?" And it's never been seen in New York. And it was wonderful. A musical and a dance together. It was fabulous. And I still talk to him about it.
But also then opera, even though it was, of course, a tradition of the Academy of Music, very mid-19th century when it was built. But you also then presented opera, a lot of opera pieces.
Well, I did some operas. Yeah. We did it. There was a guy who was a theater director in Germany, Berlin.
Peter Stein?
Peter Stein, who was a great director, who'd never done anything in the States. He was going to direct Falstaff for the Welsh National Opera. So I went to Wales, and I saw it, and I said it was terrific. And so we made arrangements for the Welsh National Opera to come to BAM to do Falstaff. And then the first time that any work by Peter Stein had been seen in the States, and it's the only work that has ever been seen by Peter Stein in the States.
Yeah, that's true. But many people remember Les Arts Florissants, what you did. It was the Lulu.
Well,
do we have an excerpt to show that? But many people. Les Arts Florissants.
Well, Les Arts Florissants was later.
Much later.
Yeah, the Falstaff was terrific. Lichtenstein, who was an ardent socialist, very ardent, but he came here. I met him at the airport, and he said, Harvey, can you drive me down Fifth Avenue? For a nice socialist, I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
Wanted to drive down Fifth Avenue.
Yeah.
I drove him to his hotel down Fifth Avenue.
It's a long conversation. Maybe we can just look a little bit at it so we can also get an idea of the
It was a brilliant production. And you know who came over? The people from Wales. Came over. These are people from Wales. And this is the Welsh national company. These came over. And the opening night was a gala featuring her. And it was the old trade center.
fantastic. Sensational.
It is actually fun. There was an article in the New York Times. John Rockwell at the time was the New York Times arts reporter in Paris, and he had seen those art stories coming. What was that opera we did? What's the name of it? He wrote a review, and I said, I gotta go see this. So I went to Paris, and it had been playing at the small opera house in Paris. It had moved to the Louis XIV Theater in what do you call it?
Versailles?
In Versailles. So I remember I took my son John there. We took a taxi out there. We came there, and we went. We thought we would have dinner out there because a couple of restaurants out there before we saw the opera. So we went to a restaurant, and we said, I said, I don't see a poster about Les Arts Florissants doing that. Are they doing an opera here? And they said, no, they finished yesterday. I said, okay. So John and I started to walk around Versailles. And all of a sudden we saw people in black tie, all dressed up, walking towards the theater. So we followed them. And we walked to the theater in Versailles. And it turned out that it was not a public performance. It was a performance for the people, for the sponsors who put up the money to produce the work. And all their employees were coming to see it in black tie. They were all dressed up. And I can tell you I was not in black tie. And then John certainly was not my son. So we just followed these people, and we walked in there, and they said, yes, there was going to be a performance of the opera, but it was all sold out to these people. There were no seats for you. They found 2 seats for me in the first row, all the way to the left, I remember. So I remember it was fantastic because I could look into the pit and I could see the conductor, what's his name? Richie, yeah.
Christie.
I could see his face as he was conducting, and I could see the orchestra. And he was smiling at the orchestra, and he was smiling when he gave his cues to the people on the stage throughout the whole opera. It was fantastic, the connection between him and that company of performers. And my son, who was with me, put his head on my lap and had a nice sleep during the first part. And then he woke up and we took a walk in the intermission, and they tried to stay awake to see some of the second half. I was so taken by it.
It is quite amazing to think that without Harvey or the Brooklyn Academy of Music, we might not have seen some of them. Some of them might have come longer after some years. But anyway, what we saw because of you, or what New York City saw, or America, it is breathtaking. I know, but perhaps one of the great achievements also is the Mahabharata, which you brought over, and maybe you tell a bit about it.
There were a number of things. I used to go to 2 festivals every summer. Aix-en-Provence.
Aix-en-Provence. Mm-hmm.
In the south of France. And what's
the Avignon?
Avignon Festival. I used to go there and see things. One time I went there with my son, who's a great gourmet, and we had with my wife and him, we had a reservation at a restaurant. My wife is my son is a great gourmet, and we had at a 5-star restaurant. And then I was sitting having lunch with a good friend of mine who knew the festival well, and he said to me, "Harvey, you're going to see the horse circus." I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "There's a horse circus in about a half an hour from Avignon. It was in a quarry. They lit it up, and it was done by, what was it called? What?
Zingaro.
Barnabas and Barnabas, we were sitting having lunch in this place, and Barnabas, and he said to me, "But Harvey, you can't get tickets, it's all sold out." And then all of a sudden, this horse comes in, and Barnabas is on the horse, which is Zingaro. It's the name of a black horse that he rode, and he rode in. And this fellow I was with said, "Wait a second." And he went up to Zingaro, he went up to Barnabas, and he said, "Barnabas," and he came back, he said, "I have 3 tickets for you tonight." And John never forgave me. He would really much rather have gone to the 5-star restaurant. And he still brings it up today.
Well, it's important to know how to get to see
But we went to see the Zingaro. It was in a quarry. They put lights all around it. And so it was like at 7 o'clock at night. And it went till about 2 o'clock in the morning. And it was really extraordinary. They passed around a bottle of wine. They gave everybody cups. To all the customers, red wine, a bottle of red wine during the performance. To all the people watching. And at the end of the performance, which I never brought to New York, this particular work, they had a horse on stage with a male horse, and Barnabas, ahead of then brought a female horse onto the stage, and the male horse mounted the female horse. And that was the end of the show. And I said, "And this is what I'm supposed to bring to New York."
Yeah.
I said, 26 horses and this. So it was amazing.
But if you would tell us the story about the Mahabharata, where you basically also found a new theater, and you saw Peter Brook's work. Did you see it first in Europe?
I saw it first in the Mahabharata. I saw it first in his. I saw it first in the same quarry.
Oh.
It went all night. It started at 7 at night and it finished at 6 in the morning. That's with the Mahabharata. And it was curious because my wife was ill and she didn't make the trip with me. She was in the hospital she was not well. So I made the trip by myself, and I was there. So at the end of the Mahabharat, I drove back to my hotel in Avignon, and I had already packed. I put it in my car, and I paid the hotel. And I drove like a madman down, and those roads in Europe, you can go 70, 80 miles an hour, no problem. And I went like a bat out of hell to catch my plane into what's by the shore in
Nice, Marseille?
not Marseille,
Nice?
Nice, to catch my plane, which I just did make it.
And you decided to bring it over and
that was only, and also the Lincoln Center Festival had started, and John Richard Rockwell was the head of it that year, and he heard about this, and he was interested. So we both wrote so he found a place where he thought he could put them. And I thought about the Battery where the Canadian circus had been as a place where it could be. And I turned it over to my stage manager, who was a marvelous woman, who's still at BAM. I said, honey, you have to figure out how we can get these 26 horses over here. And also, we can't have them be in quarantine because we don't have time for them to be in quarantine, which supposedly animals coming from a foreign country would have to be. So she worked it out that the barns were built for them down at the where we put up the tent at the
Battery Park.
And we put the whole company up across the way. There was a hotel for the sports. And so Barnabas can look down and see his horses across the way. We made a barn. And the horses and my stage hands went out there with Alice, my stage manager, to build a tent and build the quad to place for them. And that was a huge success. I remember there was, again, Jerry Robbins was a great fan. He knew about this company. And he came up to me, he said, Harvey, I'm glad you're bringing them. They're so fantastic. I said, right, Jerry. And there was another guy, Howard Gilman, who was a big supporter of BAM, who loved horses. He had a horse ranch in the South, and in Georgia and Florida. And he loved horses. And he bought out the whole opening night for his friends to come and see it.
And so, but then later on, how did you find this theater that then became the Harvey Theater, named after you? How did that all happen?
Oh, you know, I had these crazy people. Like Grotowski wanted a church, you know, and Barnabas wanted his tent. And Peter wanted a small theater like what he has in Paris.
The Bouffe du Nord. Yeah.
He didn't want any of my theaters. He didn't want the Opera House with a small theater. So I searched, I couldn't find. 2 blocks away from BAM on Fulton Street, there was an old theater which had been a 2-balcony touring theater of 60 or 80 years ago, before then, and then turned into a movie theater. and then it was closed. And I guess they didn't pay taxes, and the city had taken it over. So I said, Peter, let's take a look at this place. So we got a ladder. We couldn't get into the place. It was locked. And we didn't go to the city. The city owned it. So we got a ladder, and we climbed up the ladder, up to the first floor, and broke a window, and went inside on the balcony. Peter Brook and his stage manager, Jean Lichtenstein, and I went up the ladder. We went in there, and we saw the place was a mess. It was a balcony. The seats were rotted, and there was water all over. And Peter said, well, yeah, if we could redo it, that this could be it. And I said, thanks, Peter. So then, I remember that I said, we're going to do it, Peter, from somehow or other. And I remember going to see the mayor's office and said, I need to get some capital money to redo this theater, which the city owns, and we'll take responsibility for it. And I remember that was in the summertime, and Peter was going to come with the Mahabharata the next fall, planning about, and beginning in October or November, I think October, but I went over to Europe that summer, as I usually did, to the festivals, and I got a call in Paris, in Aix-en-Provence, or in Versailles, I don't know, but I got a call from the mayor's office, and it was one of the mayor's assistants, who was a wonderful woman. And she said, Harvey, the mayor said he'll give you $4.5 million to redo the theater. I said, thank you so much. Thank the mayor for me. You know, it was interesting because the governor at that time was his son is a governor now.
Cuomo?
Cuomo was a governor. And he did not support the New York State Council on the Arts very much. He was against the arts. And there was an article in the upper pages of the Times taking the governor to task for not supporting the arts to the New York State Council on the Arts. And I cut it out, and I sent it to him with a note saying, this is not a good idea for New York State, for you to be against this. And my secretary at that time called me and said, you got a call from Governor Cuomo. I said, did you tell him I'll call him when I get back? Yeah, I told him you were in Europe. He said, of course.
Of course. That is it. Well, it's also been a great...
He never took my call when I got back.
Yeah, so this Harvey Theater, of course, has been such a great gift, and maybe we can show a bit of the clip. But there was one question, of course, that always does come up when it comes to arts and money. Should you take money away from hospitals, from child education? What do you think? Why is art so important?
Well, let me say this. First of all, before I get to that, what happened? What happened to BAM? Was it? Yeah, the Brooklyn Academy of Music was built in the middle of the 19th century, the beginning of the American Civil War. The Brooklyn Academy of Music was 1859, 1860 was built, and it burned and it served Brooklyn well. Brooklyn was a city at that time, not a borough. So it served the city of Brooklyn well, It was the cultural aspect of the city of Brooklyn, which was a major city at that time. And it just served Brooklyn well for the remainder of the 19th century, of the 19th century. And then at the end of the 19th century, Brooklyn voted to become part of New York City. And so, and also, the building burned down. It was in Brooklyn Heights, the original Brooklyn Academy of Music. It was on Pierpont Street in Brooklyn Heights, and it burnt down. And so they decided to rebuild it in a new burgeoning part of Brooklyn, Fort Greene, which is becoming a new neighborhood in Brooklyn. And it opened in about the beginning of the 20th century. And here we were in the middle of the 20th century and still treating the Brooklyn Academy of Music as a 19th century institution, really doing work and artists being done in Manhattan. And the only way it could survive was for it to become a 20th century institution. And it was, in fact, right in front of me, because when I walk into BAM every day, right in the lobby of the Opera House, there was a round circle which said BAM, made by Italian
craftsmen
when they rebuilt that building at the beginning of the 20th century. So that is when BAM became a 20th century institution. And it was BAM, not the Brooklyn Academy of Music. It was BAM, signifying new work and interesting artists not being done in Manhattan and not being noticed at all in Manhattan. Even American people like Philip Glass and Steve Reich, who used to perform in the downtown galleries because the theaters didn't think they were worthy, important enough to perform in mid-Manhattan. So I took them on. Very early on, I had a performance of Steve Reich, and so we began to develop those kinds of artists, and Lucinda Childs, and Trisha Brown, and Merce Cunningham, and so on. And so we became BAM, a 20th century institution set up against the 19th century organizations only doing 19th century work in Manhattan. And so artists who were interested wanted to perform at BAM because that was the showcase of new work, of new artists. And that became true of Europe as well. So we became a place for Peter Brook to do his productions that he did in Paris, and every time he did one, I went over and saw it. And we worked to bring it over.
But still, when you created BAM as a 20th century or even 21st century institution, Brooklyn was a complicated neighborhood. It was, a place where people wouldn't go. They wouldn't even take the subway. They wouldn't take taxis. And you said, instead of building a hospital or a square, I'm going to bring art. I really would like to, not only is the theme of the evening, but what is you as Harvey Lichtenstein, what do you think, what's art, what does it mean to you, and why do you put your life's work into presenting it?
I had some very good board members who helped, who were terrific at the beginning, and they'll get me started. At the beginning, BAM. Even the Brooklyn Academy of Music was not a standalone institution. It was part of the Brooklyn Institute of Arts and Sciences, which includes a museum, and the Brooklyn Children's Museum, and and BAM, they were all part of the Institute. And then I was losing so much money at the beginning that the Brooklyn Institute of Arts and Sciences said, we can't keep subsidizing just BAM. You know, we're taking money that some of it should go to the Brooklyn Museum. So they decided that they were going to throw me off. They decided that we were not going to be part of the Institute anymore. We were going to be the Brooklyn Academy of Music, or BAM, separate and apart, separate board, and which we did, and had some really key people who kept us going. But it was really the changeover from the Brooklyn Academy of Music as a 19th century organization could not make it in the middle of the 20th century. With all that was going on in Manhattan, it could not compete at all on those terms. Only if it became something else. Only if it became BAM, a 20th century organization that would be interested in new work and controversial work like the Living Theater and like Philip Glass's music and John Adams's music and Steve Reich's music. Yeah. And then I remember one of my board members said to me, he was chairman of my board, and he came in one day, and I asked him to join my board, and he said, Harvey, no. He said, I'll join as your chairman, and I'll give you $100,000 a year. I said, okay, John, you got a deal. So then the rest of the board wasn't giving much money. So one day, Paul came into the meeting, a board meeting, and he said, look, everybody, you know, I come from France. I'm French as well as American. He said, you know, in the French cavalry, he said, there are all kinds of different people in the French cavalry. There are cooks, there are riflemen, and so on. But there's one thing that they all have to do. They all have to ride a horse. And he told, your horse is to raise money. You have to raise money for the Brooklyn Academy of Music. If I'm going to remain chairman, that's your horse and you have to ride it. Well, a meeting or two later, he came into that board meeting and fired 6 board members, told them to leave. That they are not committed to BAM. They're not riding their horse. And so they left, and they were furious at me. But he took me out I remember to a restaurant and ordered a bottle of champagne for dinner. And he was a very important guy. He was a guy, he said, Harvey, I hear from my friends in Europe, there's a woman named Pina Bausch. I think maybe you should go and see her. They tell me she's interesting. I said, okay. So I found out that she was performing in Cologne at a theater festival with her company. So I made, with my general manager, I made plans to go to Cologne. It was in Cologne to see it. It just so happened that the hotel we were booked in Cologne was right around the corner from the theater, right across from the beautiful cathedral in Cologne. So we went over to the theater, and they didn't have any tickets for us. They said they'd never heard from me. And I said, look, well, we came all the way over from New York to see this. So they got 2 tickets for us in the first row. The first row all the way on the left. And the piece she was doing was Bartok's piece to the opera.
Blauberg? No.
What?
Blauberg? Bluebeard?
Bluebeard.
Yeah.
And Bluebeard was a very painful and very brutal opera. I was bawled out in New York when we brought it. The head of the arts endowment, the dance department in the arts endowment, said, "How could you bring that piece, Blue? It's absolutely terrible. It's vicious. It's so terrible." And it was like men dragging women around by their hair. This man in his bathrobe, and the woman he was dragging around by his hair was his wife, and he's dragging her around in leaves, dead leaves all over the stage, in Bluebeard. So I said to my sidekick, "I don't know if I can bring that. It scares the hell out of me." She said to me, well, yeah, we can do it. I said, okay. And I remember Steve Reich at that time was in Europe. He was touring Europe, and I went to another place to see him perform in Europe, performing in a museum someplace in Europe, in Germany.
Yeah.
So we did, another important thing that I never gave up. I went to see Adrienne Mnuchin and the Théâtre du Soleil, Theater of the Sun, in Paris. I had heard about her. She had done, years before, she had done a thing on a piece about the French Revolution, which was written about all over the world. And I had not forgotten that. But now she was doing the Greek plays, the 4 plays of Aeschylus, and 1 play by Euripides or one of the other guys, to do the Agamemnon, Clytemnestra, she did 4 plays, the 3 plays by Aeschylus and 1 play by Euripides, all about Clytemnestra and Agamemnon and Orestes and so on. And I went to see it, and it was fantastic to see how she did it. It was in an old her theater was an old munitions factory in the outskirts of north of Paris. And half of the factory was a restaurant, and people ate in the restaurant. It was like a, and then there was a door which led to the other half of the place where her theater was, where she performed. And so when I went in from the restaurant to the theater, who was taking the tickets? But Mnuchin was taking the tickets to go in to see the theater. When I came back in, I didn't see how we could do it. It was a huge company. It was so expensive. And then one day I got a call from the French ministry here in New York.
French Cultural Services.
Cultural Services, about a woman who's in charge of the arts.
Elizabeth Hayes.
She said, "Harvey, I've got something to talk to you about. Can you come over to see me?" So I went over. I took one of my people. What's her name? Karen. Who our fundraiser? I said, "Karen, come with me. I want you to see this. See what we can do." So we went over to see her, and she said, "Look, Mnuchin is coming with all 4 plays to go to Quebec, to go to Montreal, and the French are paying for the whole trip. They could come down there from there to New York and play with you." And I said, "Great." She said, "And all the cost of bringing them here and paying them is taken care of by the French. The only question was, you have to get a space that Mnuchin wants to play in. It's not a church this time, but it has to be a big space like what she does in Paris. Arsenal. personality. So I said, okay. She played, a theater in Paris was an old arsenal, which had been closed. So I found what do you call them?
Armory.
An armory in Brooklyn, in Park Slope. And I went in there, and it was after the first war in Iraq, when the old man was there, was president.
Bush, yeah.
When the old man Bush was president. And so I went to this armory, and there were trucks, and there were tanks in the armory. And I said, you got to get rid of all that stuff. We need to build a theater in here. And then upstairs was a place for people who were taken care of by the city, who would sleep there and they would be fed there. So we had to make that into a theater for ministry.
No, that is extraordinary what you move to make art happen. And maybe as a last question, I remember you once said that art is what humans do, and this makes us different. This is why we have to fight for it.
The thing about art, of course, is that nobody else does it but human beings. There are animals and so on. They haven't got the brains that we have to be able to produce art, to be able to produce beauty, architecture, paintings, and theater and dance, and music and so on. If we don't do it, no one else is going to do it. No one else has the potential to do it. And I think now particularly it's so important because the world is going to fall apart if we don't take a real interest in trying to figure out how to keep it alive and keep it available for man to continue to live and create and build and design and be artists and make things and live in this extraordinary world we have made. And it's only the artists who can do that. And it's only artists and scientists who can work together to make sure that this earth doesn't fall apart. But art is important because we're the only ones that do it. No one else can do it. No other living creature can do it. As far as we know, we're the only ones that can do it. We're the only ones that can be scientists and understand what's going on. We'll try to understand what's going on in this world and what we're up against. And maybe save it for the future and for our children and for future generations. But it's up to us. There's no one else who can do it. And who can produce what Da Vinci did, and art, and science.
Yeah. No, thank you. I think Harvey has done a great work to combine it and make it together. So that things were growing and that they came together, and also, the way you transferred, to Joe Molillo, that the institution survived, that you created a management system with a great team, and Karen, who is also, I think, here, that is also exceptional. We all take this for granted.
They were fantastic.
Yeah, it's actually not to be taken for granted. I think it's also one of his great achievements next to his ties to the city, but also to have created a system that Bern still is alive in such a brilliant, fantastic institution. So again, thank you so much for coming. Thank you all for being here. We're going to have a little reception, but thank you all. And again, Harvey. Should we take some questions? Yeah, sure. You want to take? You could go, but maybe if there are 2 or 3 questions, Harvey would take some. I think we went a bit over time. So.
Well, if they were not.
If during the reception, maybe you could come. Oh, here's one. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your gift to the city, to the artists, and to the audiences. I would like to ask the question, New York, and maybe in particular Manhattan, has become very difficult for theater artists, particularly in terms of space. Real estate is out of sight. And do you have any ideas or recommendations or any thoughts about what could be done to perhaps inspire some of the great developers to do more for artistic real estate?
Well, there's one thing that New York has had over the past number of years. Is a great cultural commissioner. What's her name?
Kate Levin.
Kate Levin. And if you can get her to really try and talk to the, she's an extraordinary, intelligent woman. And she was brought up on Elizabethan drama and has her I think her degree in theater. And if you could get her to really help to maybe lead a movement to understand the value of what art is for human beings and for this world, how important it is. And how it must be provided for. An artist must be given an opportunity to work, and places to work, and money to develop their work in a situation which allows them to work.
Maybe one more, we went a bit over time, but maybe one more question if there is one.
When Harvey started at the Brooklyn Academy of Music, Kingsborough Community College had also opened at the Masonic Temple at Claremont and Lafayette, a part of the campus, 500 students. This is the late 60s. He brought in Merce Cunningham, Elliot Feld, Alvin Ailey one year. He gave me 1,000 tickets, orchestra seats for the students. I mean, the charismatic, it wasn't to keep it or to, become a megalomania about what he was doing. He was already infiltrating the neighborhood and society. And I remember one young man from Bed-Stuy, he said, that's the first time I've ever gone to a theater. I mean, these kids were poor. Yeah. And so there were some beautiful things, too, that came out, since no one's asking anything.
There's a lot of things happening in the Bronx and in Queens. And you just have to keep on fighting. But Kate would be a terrific person to get involved in, if you can get her.
But I think we're going to go over now to the reception again. Thank you for coming. And again, Harvey, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Keep fighting.